It was one of those warm afternoons when the sun sat lazily over the quiet streets, and the world seemed too calm for anything bad to happen. A young boy named Ethan was walking home from school, his backpack hanging loosely on one shoulder and his old sneakers scraping softly against the pavement. His hair was messy and his shirt had a few wrinkles, but he didn't care. He was tired, hungry, and just wanted to get home, maybe grab a sandwich and watch some cartoons before his mom came back from work. The street he walked on wasn't busy. A few cars passed now and then, and some people were sweeping their porches or watering their plants. It was an ordinary day in every possible way. Ethan liked this time of day. It was peaceful, quiet, and the world felt safe, or at least he thought it was. As he turned the corner near the small convenience store, he heard the screech of tires behind him. A police car came to a sudden stop at the side of the road. The sound made him jump a little. He turned around, confused, just in time to see a tall police officer step out. The man's face looked tense, like someone who had been chasing something or was already angry about something else. The officer's eyes landed on Ethan. "Hey, you there?" he shouted. "Stop right there." Ethan froze. He wasn't sure if the officer was talking to him or someone else. He looked around, but the street was empty. The officer started walking quickly toward him, one hand resting on his belt. Ethan's heart began to race. "Me?" he asked softly, pointing at himself. "Yes, you," the officer barked. "Come here." Ethan swallowed hard and stepped closer, unsure of what was happening. The officer looked him up and down, then asked, "What are you doing here?" "I'm just walking home from school," Ethan said quietly. "From school, huh?" The officer repeated in a sharp tone. "Where's your bag?" Ethan lifted his backpack slightly. "Right here." The officer narrowed his eyes. "What's in it?" "Books," Ethan replied. "And my lunchbox." The officer didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer and said, "There's been a report of vandalism a few blocks from here. A group of kids spray-painted a store wall and ran off. You fit the description?" Ethan's mouth went dry. "But I didn't do anything. I just got off the bus." The officer folded his arms. "That's what they all say." Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, really. I didn't do anything." His voice trembled. He was scared, not because he had done something wrong, but because the man in front of him didn't seem interested in listening. A few people nearby started watching quietly. A woman standing by her car frowned and whispered something to another passerby. But nobody stepped forward. People rarely did when things like this happened. The officer took a step closer and said, "Show me your ID." "I'm only 13, Ethan said. "I don't have one." The man sighed impatiently and gestured toward the boy's backpack. "Open it," Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to make things worse, so he carefully unzipped it and showed his notebooks, pencil case, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. The officer looked through it anyway, his movements rough and hurried. Ethan felt embarrassed. Everyone was staring now. His cheeks burned with shame. When the officer found nothing suspicious, instead of easing up, he frowned even more. "You sure you weren't with anyone else?" "I was alone," Ethan said softly. "I swear," but the man wasn't listening. He started asking more questions: where he lived, who his parents were, why he was walking this way. Ethan answered everything honestly, but the tone of the officer's voice made him feel smaller with every passing second. At one point, Ethan tried to take a small step back, but the officer snapped, "Don't move." The boy froze again, feeling his eyes sting. He didn't want to cry. He just wanted this to end. Across the street, a man wearing a gray hoodie, jeans, and sunglasses had stopped near a vending machine. He had a bottle of water in one hand and seemed to be watching the scene closely. Nobody recognized him right away. He looked like any regular guy, tall, strong, calm, and quiet. The officer kept raising his voice, and the people around grew uneasy. Someone whispered, "He's just a kid." Another person muttered, "That's going too far." But still, nobody stepped in. Ethan's hands trembled as he tried again. "Please, sir, I didn't do anything. I just want to go home. Stop lying," the officer barked. "Tell me who you were with." "I wasn't with anyone," Ethan said, tears finally forming in his eyes. At that moment, the man by the vending machine took a slow sip of water, then placed the bottle down on the edge of a trash bin. He started walking toward them, not quickly, just calmly, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The officer didn't notice him at first. He was too focused on the frightened boy. When the man got close enough, he said in a deep but steady voice, "Hey, officer, maybe take it easy. He's just a kid." The officer turned sharply, glaring at him. "Excuse me? This is official police business. Stay out of it." The man nodded slightly, his voice calm. "I get that. But maybe you should hear him out before you scare him half to death." "I said stay out of it," the officer snapped again. His tone was cold and defensive. Ethan looked at the stranger, surprised by how unbothered he seemed. There was something oddly familiar about his face, even with the sunglasses on. His voice sounded familiar too, like someone Ethan had heard before, maybe on TV, but his brain couldn't place it right away. The man raised his hands slightly, showing he meant no trouble. "All right, just saying, you might be talking to the wrong person. He doesn't look like someone who's done anything." The officer muttered under his breath and turned back toward Ethan, clearly annoyed that someone had interrupted his questioning. But the man didn't move away. He just stood there quietly, watching. Ethan glanced at him again, and for a split second their eyes met. The man gave him a reassuring nod, as if to say, "It's okay. You're not alone." That small gesture was enough to calm Ethan's shaking hands a little. He felt like someone finally saw him, not as a suspect, but as a person. The officer started to get impatient. He asked the same questions again, this time louder, as if repeating them would magically change the answers. Ethan tried to keep his voice steady, but his fear made it hard to speak. The man in the hoodie finally spoke again. "Officer, look around. There are people watching. Maybe this isn't the way to handle it." The officer turned back toward him, frustrated. "Who are you to tell me how to handle my job?" The man smiled faintly, not in a mocking way, but in a calm, confident one. "Just someone who believes you can do it better." For a moment, their eyes locked. Something about the man's tone and posture carried quiet authority, not the loud, forceful kind, but the kind that came from real presence. The officer hesitated for the first time, as if unsure what to do next. Ethan stood still, clutching his backpack tightly. He wanted to thank the stranger, but didn't dare to speak. The man adjusted his cap and stepped just a little closer, his voice still steady. "He said he came from school. Maybe ask which one. There are plenty of kids walking this way around this time." The officer blinked, slightly thrown off by how reasonable the man sounded. For the first time since stepping out of his car, his tone softened just a little. "Which school?" he asked Ethan. "Pineview Middle," Ethan answered quickly. "You can call the office." "I was there all day." The officer paused. The tension in his shoulders eased just a bit, but he still looked uncertain. The man folded his arms casually. "See? That's easy to check." There was something about the way he said it, patient, calm, and respectful, that made even the officer stop and think. The people nearby seemed to sense the shift too. The scene, which had started as tense and upsetting, was slowly changing. Ethan still looked scared, but he was no longer alone. The man in the hoodie stayed right beside him, quiet but alert. Nobody yet realized that the person standing next to Ethan wasn't just any man. Under that hoodie, behind those sunglasses, was someone millions of people around the world recognized. Someone whose face was on posters, whose voice echoed through arenas. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a scared boy finally had someone standing up for him, not with anger or shouting, but with calm and kindness. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling a little braver now. He didn't know who this man really was, but somehow his presence made everything feel safer. The officer didn't say much after that. He muttered something into his radio, probably calling someone for confirmation. The tension in the air still lingered, but it was fading slowly. The man waited silently, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. Ethan stood beside him, still shaking a bit, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. And though the officer didn't yet know it, he was just moments away from realizing who exactly he had told to mind his business. Because standing right there, beside the frightened boy, was none other than John Cena, calm, quiet, and ready to remind everyone what real strength looked like. The street had grown quieter, but the tension still hung in the air. The officer's radio crackled softly as he spoke into it, trying to confirm the boy's story. Ethan stood there, gripping the straps of his backpack, trying to steady his breathing. His eyes darted from the officer to the man beside him, the stranger who had stepped in when no one else did. The man in the gray hoodie didn't say much. He just stood there, calm and watchful. There was something about his presence that made Ethan feel protected. He didn't know why, but he felt safe even though the situation was far from over. A few people nearby were still recording the scene on their phones. Others whispered among themselves, wondering who the tall man was. He didn't seem afraid of the officer. In fact, he looked like someone who had seen this kind of situation before and knew exactly how to handle it. The officer lowered his radio and looked back at Ethan. "They're checking the school records," he said. His tone still firm but not as harsh as before. "If you're lying, this is going to get worse for you." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not lying, sir. You can ask my teacher." The man beside him spoke again, his voice even and patient. "He's been saying the same thing since you stopped him. Maybe it's time to believe him." The officer shot him a sharp look. "I told you this doesn't concern you." The man didn't flinch. "It does when you're scaring a kid for no reason." The people watching started to nod and murmur in agreement. Someone whispered, "He's right." Another added, "That boy didn't do anything." The officer's face tightened. Maybe he felt embarrassed being called out in front of others. He stepped closer to Ethan again. "You said you just got off the bus." "Which stop?" Ethan answered quickly, pointing down the street. "Right there, near the corner by the grocery store." The man in the hoodie nodded.
"That checks out."
"I saw the bus a few minutes ago when I came around the block." The officer frowned but didn't say anything right away. He seemed to be thinking, trying to piece things together. For a few seconds the air was still, except for the soft hum of cars passing by in the distance. Then, out of nowhere, another voice called from the other side of the street. "Hey, officer!" It was an older woman standing by her porch. "That boy's telling the truth. I saw him walking from the bus stop." "He didn't do anything." Ethan turned to look at her, relief flooding his face. The officer hesitated. He seemed unsure now. The man in the hoodie gave a small nod, almost like a quiet thank you toward the woman. She smiled faintly, folding her arms. "You're scaring that poor child for nothing," she added. The officer took a slow breath and rubbed the back of his neck. "All right," he said, his tone softening. "I just needed to make sure." But before Ethan could respond, the man beside him spoke again. "Making sure is fine. But next time, maybe do it without making someone feel guilty before you know the truth." The officer's expression changed again, part frustration, part embarrassment. "Who even are you?" he asked, his voice lower now. The man smiled slightly, not in an arrogant way, but in a calm, steady way that showed confidence. "Doesn't matter who I am," he said. "What matters is how we treat people." Ethan looked up at him, curious. Something about the man's voice and his way of speaking felt strangely familiar. It wasn't until the man turned his head slightly and the sunlight caught his face that Ethan's eyes widened. He blinked a few times, almost in disbelief. He leaned closer and whispered quietly, "Wait, are you?" The man gave him a tiny smile and a wink, putting a finger to his lips as if to say, "Don't tell." Ethan's mouth fell open a little. He couldn't believe it. Standing next to him, defending him, was John Cena, the same person he had watched countless times on TV, the same guy whose posters hung on his bedroom wall. His heart raced, not from fear this time, but from pure shock and excitement. He wanted to shout it out, but he could tell Cena didn't want the attention. Not yet. Meanwhile, the officer was still talking into his radio, not noticing the growing buzz among the people nearby. Some of them were starting to recognize the man now. A couple of whispers spread through the small crowd. "Wait, hold on. That looks like John Cena. No way, it can't be." But it was. The officer finally put his radio down, unaware that the crowd's eyes had shifted from him to the man beside Ethan. "All right. Looks like they're confirming your story," he said to Ethan. "But next time, don't run off when a police car stops." "I didn't run," Ethan said quietly. "You just yelled and I stopped." The man beside him added calmly, "Yeah, I saw it." He stopped right away. "You came in a little too fast." The officer opened his mouth to argue, but just then one of the bystanders said loudly, "Wait a second. That's John Cena, isn't it?" The words cut through the air like a spark. Everyone turned. The officer froze. He blinked and stared at the man in the hoodie. The realization hit him a few seconds later. It was indeed John Cena, standing right there in casual clothes, defending a scared kid. The officer's stern expression vanished, replaced by visible shock. Wait, you're..." Cena gave a small nod, half smiling. Yeah, he said quietly. But right now I'm just a guy asking you to show a little kindness. The crowd began murmuring louder, some taking more photos and videos. A few people even clapped softly. The officer looked around, clearly uncomfortable now that everyone was watching. He shifted awkwardly, rubbing his temple. I didn't mean any harm, he muttered. I just thought, I know, Cena said, interrupting gently. I get that. You've got a tough job, but sometimes we forget that the person in front of us might just be scared, not guilty. The officer nodded slowly, not knowing what else to say. The situation had completely changed. Ethan stood there staring up at Cena, still trying to process everything. A few minutes ago he had been terrified and humiliated. Now the same man who used to be his favorite wrestler was standing beside him, speaking up for him in front of everyone. Cena looked down at him and asked softly, You okay, kid?
Ethan nodded, though his voice trembled. Yeah.
I think so. Good, Cena said with a reassuring smile. You did nothing wrong. Remember that. The officer stepped back, trying to regain his composure. All right, he said, clearing his throat. Looks like this was a misunderstanding. You can go. Ethan didn't move right away. He kept glancing between the officer and Cena, unsure of what to do next. Cena gave him a little pat on the shoulder. Go on, buddy. You're fine. The boy started walking slowly, still clutching his backpack. Cena walked beside him for a bit, making sure he was calm. The officer stood silently by his car, probably wondering how the situation had turned upside down so quickly. As they walked down the block, Ethan finally spoke. I can't believe this is real, he said, his voice small but full of emotion. You really helped me. Cena chuckled softly. I didn't do much, he said. You stood your ground. You told the truth. That's what matters. But if you hadn't said anything, he wouldn't have believed me, Ethan said. You made him stop. Cena shook his head gently. Sometimes it just takes one voice to make someone think twice. Remember that. They walked a little farther until they were away from the small crowd. Ethan looked up at him again, still amazed. Why'd you help me? He asked. Cena smiled. Because you needed it. And because if I were in your shoes, I'd want someone to do the same for me. The boy nodded, taking in every word. There was something so genuine about the way Cena spoke. No big speeches, no spotlight, just quiet kindness. When they reached the next corner, Ethan stopped. This is my street, he said softly. Cena nodded. All right then. You get home safe. Ethan hesitated, then said, Thank you. Cena smiled and held out his hand. Ethan shook it with both of his face lighting up with the biggest smile he'd had all day. Keep being you, kid, Cena said. Don't let anyone make you feel small. With that, he turned and started walking the other way. Ethan stood there for a few seconds, watching him go, still stunned by what had just happened. He didn't even notice the small crowd still talking behind him, or the officer now standing quietly by his car, deep in thought. All he could think about was how a stranger, a superstar, had stepped in when no one else did. As Cena disappeared down the street, Ethan finally started toward home. His steps were lighter now, his heart calmer. What had started as one of the worst moments of his life had turned into something he would never forget. He didn't know it yet, but the video of that moment would soon spread everywhere. People all over would see how John Cena had quietly stood up for a scared boy. Not with fame or force, but with simple humanity. But for Ethan, the real story wasn't about who helped him. It was about what he learned that day, that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who fight, but the ones who protect. And somewhere, just around the corner, John Cena smiled to himself, glad he had been in the right place at the right time. The next morning, the small town woke up to whispers and notifications. A video had started spreading online. It showed a short clip of a police officer arguing with a boy and a man stepping in to protect him. At first, people just saw it as another tense moment caught on camera. But then someone in the comments pointed out what everyone else had missed. The man in the hoodie, the one who stood beside the boy, it was none other than John Cena. The comments exploded. People started sharing the video again and again. John Cena defends kid from being unfairly treated. One caption read, John Cena steps in like a real hero, said another. The clip reached thousands of views in just a few hours, and soon it was everywhere. But while the internet was buzzing, Ethan had no idea that his life was about to change. He had spent the night thinking about what happened. He could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered Cena's calm voice, his reassuring smile, and the way he had stood up for him without hesitation. It felt like a dream, one that he still couldn't believe had really happened. When he came down for breakfast, his mom was already at the table, scrolling through her phone. She looked up with wide eyes the moment she saw him. "Ethan," she said, her voice half shocked and half amazed. "You need to see this." He blinked. "See what?" She turned the phone toward him. On the screen was the video, the one from yesterday. And there he was, standing beside John Cena. Ethan's mouth dropped open. "No way," he whispered. His mom stared at him, speechless. "Why didn't you tell me this happened?" "I didn't know it was on camera," he said. "I just thought it was over." She sighed, shaking her head but smiling a little. "You're trending, kiddo." Ethan laughed nervously. "Great. Just what I needed. Everyone at school seeing me almost cry in front of John Cena." His mom reached over and gently squeezed his hand. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. You handled it better than most adults would have." Ethan nodded slowly. Deep down, though, he couldn't help but feel nervous about the attention. He wasn't used to people watching him, talking about him, or sharing his face online. When he got to school that morning, the whispers started the moment he walked through the gate. A few kids stared at him like he was some kind of celebrity. Some even asked, "Was that really John Cena?" Others patted him on the shoulder, saying things like, "Dude, that's crazy," or "You're famous now." Ethan just smiled shyly, not sure how to respond. It felt strange. Yesterday he had been scared and helpless. Today everyone wanted to talk to him. During lunch, his best friend Ben slid into the seat next to him with a huge grin. "Bro, you're all over the internet. My dad showed me the video this morning. John Cena actually helped you." "That's insane." Ethan chuckled, still a bit overwhelmed. "Yeah, it's real. He was right there. I still can't believe it." "What did he say to you?" Ben asked eagerly. Ethan smiled at the memory. "He told me not to let anyone make me feel small." Ben nodded. "Man, that's deep." "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "He's different in real life, calm, kind, not like how people imagine celebrities. He didn't want cameras or attention. He just wanted to help." Meanwhile, in another part of town, John Cena was sitting quietly in a cafe, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He had seen the viral clips too. He wasn't surprised that it had spread. Someone always filmed these things, but he wished people would focus less on who helped and more on why. He sighed, putting his phone face down. The last thing he wanted was praise for something that should be normal, standing up for someone who couldn't defend themselves. Still, he couldn't help but hope the boy was doing all right. Later that day, his manager called. "John, that video's everywhere. News outlets are already calling. Do you want to make a statement?" Cena paused for a moment, then said, "No, not yet. It's not about me. People want to hear from you," the manager insisted. "You could use this to spread a positive message." Cena thought about it. Maybe that wasn't such a bad idea. But he didn't want to make it about fame or headlines. He wanted the message to mean something real. That evening, he finally posted something small on his social media. It was just a simple message, no hashtags, no pictures. He wrote, "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't need an audience. Be kind, be fair. You never know whose day you might change." Within minutes, the post went viral. People shared it thousands of times, adding comments like, "He's the real deal," and "John Cena doesn't just talk about respect, he lives it." Back in Ethan's house, his mom showed him the post. "Look, he mentioned it," she said with a smile. Ethan read it slowly, feeling something warm spread in his chest. Cena hadn't said his name, hadn't taken credit, but he knew the message was about what had happened. And somehow that meant even more. Later that week, something unexpected happened. The police department released a public apology for the incident. They said it had been a misunderstanding, and that the officer involved had acted too quickly without full information. The statement also said that the officer would receive additional training on how to handle interactions with minors. When Ethan's mom read the statement out loud at the dinner table, Ethan felt a small wave of relief. It didn't erase what happened, but it showed that people were paying attention. Maybe, just maybe, it would stop something like that from happening again. "Looks like your story made a difference," his mom said, smiling. Ethan nodded, thinking quietly. I guess it did. But deep down he knew the real reason it made a difference wasn't because of the video or the apology. It was because someone like John Cena, had decided to step in, to care, and to show what real strength looks like. A few days later, something else surprising happened. Cena's team reached out to Ethan's mom. They said John wanted to meet Ethan again privately, away from cameras and crowds. Not for publicity, but just to check on him. When Ethan heard the news, his jaw dropped. You're kidding, he said. His mom laughed. I wouldn't joke about that. 2 days later, they met at a small community center not far from town. There was no crowd this time, no flashing lights, just the same calm, kind man in a hoodie and a smile. When Ethan saw him, he couldn't stop grinning. Hey, Cena said warmly, crouching a little to meet his eyes. How've you been, champ? Ethan shrugged, smiling shyly. Better now. I still can't believe you wanted to see me again. Cena laughed softly. Of course I did. You handled a tough situation really well. You stayed respectful even when you were scared. That takes courage. Ethan looked down, embarrassed but happy. I just didn't want to make things worse. And you didn't, Cena said. You did great. For a moment, they just talked like old friends. Ethan told him about school, about how weird it was seeing himself online and how his friends wouldn't stop talking about it. Cena listened patiently, nodding and smiling. Then Ethan asked quietly, Why did you really help me that day? Cena paused. Because I saw someone being treated unfairly, and I remembered how I'd want someone to stand up for me if I were in your place. Ethan nodded slowly. Most people didn't say anything. They just watched, Cena sighed. That happens a lot, but that's why we need more people to speak up. Not everyone can stop a problem, but everyone can care enough to try. The boy smiled. I want to be like that when I grow up. Cena grinned. You already are, buddy. Before leaving, Cena gave Ethan a small wristband with the word respect written on it, the same kind he often gave fans at events. Keep this, he said. Not as a souvenir, but as a reminder. You don't need to be famous to make a difference. You just need to be kind. Ethan held it tightly, promising he'd never lose it. That night, as he sat on his bed, he looked at the wristband and thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the confusion, the kindness, and the strength. He realized something important. That one moment of courage from a stranger had changed everything for him. He didn't just see John Cena as a celebrity anymore. He saw him as a human being, someone who believed in respect, fairness, and compassion. And Ethan made himself a quiet promise that night. One day, he would do for someone else what Cena had done for him. He didn't know when or how, but he knew it would happen. Because kindness, once shown, doesn't stop. It keeps spreading, one person at a time. The next few weeks went by faster than anyone expected. The video that had first gone viral slowly began turning into something more meaningful. It wasn't just another trending clip anymore. It had started to inspire people. Across the internet, people were sharing their own stories. Some talked about times they had seen someone being treated unfairly and wished they had spoken up. Others shared how one act of kindness had changed their day. It was like the small moment between Ethan and Cena had started a wave that reached far beyond their town. But for Ethan, life was still settling down. School had returned to normal mostly. There were still curious eyes that watched him, and teachers who smiled when they passed him in the hall. Some even mentioned how proud they were of the way he handled everything. It was strange hearing that word, proud, used about something that had scared him so deeply at first. One afternoon, as he was leaving school, his principal called him into the office. Ethan, she said kindly, I wanted to let you know that the local news station reached out. They want to do a short interview with you. Ethan froze. An interview about... What happened? She nodded gently. Yes, they said they want to focus on the positive side, how you handled the situation and the message of kindness that came from it. Your mom said she'd talk it over with you first. Ethan hesitated. The idea of being on TV made his stomach twist, but he also remembered what Cena had said, to use your voice when you can. Maybe this was his chance to do that. That night, he sat with his mom at the kitchen table, the same spot where everything always seemed to happen. Do you think I should do it? He asked. His mom looked at him carefully. Do you want to? I think so, he said slowly. Not for attention, I just want people to know what he told me. That kindness matters, she smiled softly. Then that's exactly what you should say. The day of the interview came quickly. The reporter who arrived wasn't what Ethan expected. She was gentle and calm, speaking to him like a friend instead of someone chasing a headline. She asked him about how he felt that day, what went through his mind, and how it felt when someone like Cena stepped in. Ethan spoke honestly. "I was scared at first," he admitted. "I didn't know what to do. But when he showed up, it wasn't about being famous or strong. It was about being fair. He just treated me like a person. That's what meant the most." The reporter smiled. "That's a good message, Ethan." He nodded shyly. "I think people forget sometimes that doing the right thing doesn't need cameras. It just needs heart." The interview aired that weekend, and once again people responded with warmth and support. But this time it wasn't just about John Cena, it was about Ethan. The story was now seen through his eyes, his courage, and his growth. In one of the clips that circulated afterward, someone wrote in the comments, "The world needs more Ethans. He's proof that kindness inspires kindness." It made him blush when he saw it, but he also felt proud, truly proud, for the first time. Meanwhile, Cena saw the interview too. He watched quietly, smiling as Ethan spoke with honesty and grace. He had seen hundreds of interviews in his life, but this one touched him differently. The boy wasn't speaking like someone chasing attention. He was speaking from the heart. Later that evening, Cena posted something new online. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but people immediately knew who it was about. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. "Proud of this young man." Ethan's mom showed him the post as they sat on the couch, and Ethan smiled so wide it hurt. "He saw it?" he asked. "He sure did," she said, hugging him tightly. "And I think he's proud of you." As the weeks passed, Ethan started to feel like life was returning to normal again, though a better kind of normal. He joined a new after-school group that focused on community kindness projects. They collected food for families in need, wrote thank you letters to local workers, and volunteered at small-town events. It wasn't fancy or famous, but it felt real, and Ethan liked that. One Friday afternoon, while helping pack supplies for a charity drive, Ethan's teacher pulled him aside. "You know, this group got more volunteers after your story went viral," she said with a smile. "People wanted to be part of something good." Ethan looked around the room where kids laughed and worked together, taping boxes and labeling donations. "That's what he would have wanted," he said quietly. Who would have wanted?" she asked. He smiled. "Cena," she chuckled. "Well, then I'd say you're both doing a great job." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how one small act had led to all of this. He remembered how afraid he had been that day, how unsure he felt, and how one person's calmness had changed everything. He reached for the wristband Cena had given him. It still sat neatly on his bedside table. He slipped it on his wrist again and whispered softly, "Thank you." What Ethan didn't know was that his story was still growing in ways he couldn't imagine. A few months later, his mom received an email invitation. It was from a youth foundation that worked with public figures to promote kindness and anti-bullying programs in schools. They had heard about Ethan's story and wanted him to share his experience at one of their upcoming events. When she told him, he was speechless. "They want me to speak?" She nodded. "Just a few minutes. You don't have to if you don't want to." He thought about it for a long moment, then smiled nervously. "Nope, I want to. I think I should." The event took place in a large community hall filled with families, teachers, and students. The foundation had arranged for several guest speakers, including John Cena himself, who had quietly agreed to attend and support the program. Ethan didn't know that until the morning of the event. When the organizer told him, his heart nearly stopped. "He's coming here?" he asked wide-eyed. "Yes," the organizer said with a smile, "and he's very proud of what you're doing." When the time came for Ethan to walk on stage, his hands were shaking. He looked out at the crowd, hundreds of faces staring back, waiting. For a second, the fear almost came back, but then from one of the front rows he saw Cena, sitting quietly, giving him a small thumbs up and a reassuring smile. Something inside Ethan steadied. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan. A while ago, something happened to me that scared me a lot. I didn't know what to do, and I felt like no one would help. But then someone did, not because he was famous, but because he cared. And that moment taught me something, that doing the right thing isn't about being strong or rich or important. It's about being kind, The room was silent except for his voice. I learned that one person's courage can change everything for someone else. And I think if we all remember that, maybe the world can feel a little safer, a little kinder. When he finished, the audience stood up in applause. Ethan blinked in surprise as he saw tears in some people's eyes. He looked at Cena again, who was clapping proudly, his eyes full of warmth. After the event, Cena came up to him backstage. "You nailed it," he said with a grin. Ethan laughed nervously. "I was so scared," Cena shook his head. "You didn't look it. You spoke from the heart, and that's what matters." They talked for a while quietly, away from the cameras and crowd. Cena told him how proud he was, and Ethan thanked him for changing his life. But Cena just smiled and said, "You changed your own life, kid. I just gave it a little push." That evening, as the sun set outside the hall, Ethan stood by the window watching the golden light spill across the sky. It had been a long journey from that scary afternoon months ago to this moment. He thought about all the people who had reached out, all the stories that had come from his own. He realized that kindness really did spread, like ripples in water, starting from one small act and reaching countless others. As Cena walked out to his car, he turned one last time and waved at Ethan. The boy waved back, smiling through the glass, and in that silent moment, something beautiful passed between them: respect, gratitude, and the quiet understanding that their paths had crossed for a reason. Neither of them knew how many more lives that single moment would go on to touch. But one thing was certain: it wasn't just a story about a celebrity helping a kid. It was a story about humanity, about what happens when people choose compassion over silence, and when courage meets kindness in the simplest of ways. A few months had passed since the event at the community hall, but the memory of that day still felt fresh in Ethan's mind. Every time he thought about it, he smiled. He never imagined he would one day stand on a stage, facing hundreds of people with John Cena sitting in the audience cheering for him. It still felt unreal. Life after that moment began to move forward, but something inside Ethan had changed. He wasn't just the shy boy who kept to himself anymore. He had found something new inside him: courage. Not the loud kind that shouts or fights, but the quiet kind that helps you speak up when it matters. He started taking small steps to spread that message in his own school. He created a small project called The Kind Corner. It was just a notice board in the hallway where students could pin up kind messages, thank you notes, or even small drawings that made people smile. At first, not many joined in, but within a few weeks it was full of color and warmth. Teachers and students alike stopped by every day to read the notes. One morning, his principal walked up to him and said, "Ethan, this board has made the whole school a better place." Ethan smiled. "It's everyone's kindness, not just mine," she nodded proudly. Still, someone had to start it. That small board became something bigger. Other schools in the area heard about it and began their own versions. Soon there was a kind corner in almost every school in the district. It amazed Ethan to see how one idea could spread so fast. He often thought back to that one day when everything had changed, the day a stranger had stood beside him when no one else did. Meanwhile, John Cena continued his busy life, traveling, filming, attending charity events. Yet no matter where he went, he couldn't forget that small-town boy who had reminded him that being famous wasn't about attention, but about impact. Sometimes, before a big speech or event, he thought about Ethan's words. Doing the right thing isn't about being strong or important. It's about being kind. Those words stuck with him. Months later, Cena received an invitation to a nationwide youth event about leadership and kindness. When he read the guest list, one name made him pause. "Ethan," he smiled to himself. "Well," he murmured, "looks like it's time for another reunion." Ethan didn't know that Cena would be there. When the organizers told him a few days before the event, his eyes widened in surprise. "He's coming again?" he said, barely believing it. "Yes," the coordinator said, smiling. "He's actually one of the main speakers this time." Ethan felt a rush of nerves and excitement at the same time. He remembered the first time he met Cena, how scared he had been back then, and how that moment had changed his whole world. This time he wanted to thank him properly, not as a frightened kid, but as someone who had grown. The event took place in a large auditorium filled with young students, teachers, and community members. The walls were decorated with words like courage, empathy, and respect. There was an air of excitement and hope in the room, Ethan was scheduled to speak before Cena. As he waited backstage, he took a deep breath, trying to calm the flutter in his chest. He could hear the hum of the audience, the faint echo of microphones, and somewhere in the front row, he knew, was the man who had once changed everything for him.